Hello everyone, welcome to another Playwright tutorial, and in this video we'll try to understand await, timeout, and action timeout. So if you have some experience in Playwright, this video will be helpful for you to understand these topics in details. So first let's focus on await. So if you look at these two lines of code, we have used await for the first line. Now, why do we use await and what happens if we don't use it? So if you notice the first line, we have a button that we identified from the web page, and this is the ID. The ID is submit dash button. So basically, we would like to click on this button, and then we want to print that button clicked. Now, if you don't use await, what's going to happen is the click may not happen, and it will proceed to the next line and print out button clicked. If you do use await, which basically means it's going to pause the execution. So basically it means it will wait for this element to show up on the web page and it is clicked. Once these two actions are done, await will move to the next line. Okay, so that's why I mentioned here that until the submit button is found and clicked. Okay, after it is found and clicked, Playwright will go to the, await will go to the next line, which is printing it out. And the click and the finding, we call this an asynchronous task, which we'll explain in a minute. Let's look at another line of code. We have page.wait for timeout 1000, which basically means you would like to pause the execution for 1 second. So probably you want to wait for the page to load. So you're waiting for a second. In this case, you also need to use await because if you don't use await, this will not pause for 1 second. It will immediately go to the next step without pausing this for 1 second. Because again, this is an asynchronous task, which will not work. So you must use await here as well. Okay, so now what is an asynchronous task? So in Playwright, a button click or wait for timeout both are called asynchronous because of a few things. So first, the browser might need time to find the button. So when you load a page, immediately the button may not show up. It may take a few seconds or a few milliseconds to show up the button. The action itself, so once you see the button, you again have to wait a moment to click the button. So there is another waiting there. Playwright waits for the button to be found in the DOM. So as mentioned, you have to first make sure the button is there. Second is it's ready for interactions, it's not hidden or disabled. And three, successfully clicked. So all these actions will be done before await take you to the next line of code. So since all these steps takes an unknown amount of time, because I don't know how long this will take, it may take 1 second or 2 seconds, depending on how heavy the web page is. And that's the reason we call the page.click is an asynchronous operation. Same for wait for timeout, which is also an asynchronous operation. So now let's look at an example to understand this a little better. So I'm gonna go to my script and here is a simple script that I wrote, which basically just clicks a button. So first, let me show you the web page that I'm interacting with. So this is a simple web page, which basically has three products with three buttons. And I would like to click on, for example, the product 2 button, which will take me to the next page where it says the second item has been added to your cart. So that's the script that I have that allows me to click the second button and it takes me to the next page. So for this action, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first navigate to this web page. I'm going to identify the button. I'm going to then click the button and then prints out button clicked. And as you can see that I have properly used await for all the actions. So navigation, and this is asynchronous. Again, I'm using await, clicking, await. Okay. So now let's run this and see what happens since I'm using await. So the test should pass. and you can see that it did. So it opens the web page, clicks the button. Since it goes too quickly, probably you didn't see that the click actually happened, but it did work, and you can see that it says passed, and it took 3.4 seconds to complete. Now, let me close this. And you will notice the time is displayed here that to navigate to a web page, it took 146 milliseconds. To click the button, it took 220 milliseconds. Okay, so I'm gonna write these time here. On this one, 220 milliseconds. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna use await. Okay, let's remove await for the first one, and let's see what happens. If I now click on run. Okay, this time it worked. If you notice here, it took 179 milliseconds. So since this page is pretty basic, it immediately loads the page and there is no issue going to this page. And the time is enough for us to go to this page because this page is pretty simple. But this may fail if you have another page that is more complicated or has more web elements. Now I'm going to delete the await from this one. Okay. So it took 220 milliseconds last time when we ran. So I'm going to now run this again. So I don't have any await. So let's see what happens. And now we can see that it failed. Okay. It didn't work. And you will notice that it failed, but the button clicked, the print statement did work. So the click event never happened because bef before it clicked, um, um, it goes to the next line since there is no await. So this one took 44 milliseconds, and this one is also probably going too fast because it is supposed to take 146 millisecond or maybe more or slightly less. But since I did not use await, this one only took 44 milliseconds, and this one never happened because I did not use await. So that's why we have to make sure that we're using await to make sure that you are waiting enough time on that page so that it actually clicks and then go to the next line. Since I did not use it, it went too fast and my test case failed. So that's the reason we use await to make sure that we wait proper amount of time or that every actions is done properly. Okay, so that's the purpose of using await. Our next topic, let me close this and go to the next. So the next thing we have is timeout. So what is timeout? So timeout basically means the maximum execution time for each test. If a test exceeds this duration, it fails. By default, for each test, you will get 30 seconds. You don't have to specify anything. Playwright by default provides 30 seconds for each test. So if you notice this test will wait 30 seconds to complete. If your test is taking more than 30 seconds, for example, let's say the button is not clickable or it is not visible within 30 seconds, this test will fail because it waited 30 seconds, it didn't find this button, so it will fail. So it's not gonna wait indefinite amount of time. It will wait exactly 30 seconds before it give you the status. However, if you want to override this, that, okay, no, I don't want to wait 30 seconds. My test case may take about 50 seconds or 60 seconds. So in that case, what we can do is we can add a timeout in the config file. So that will make sure that you're waiting longer for each test. So instead of using 30 seconds, we can have a timeout of 60 seconds max for each test. So to add this, I'm going to go to the config file. So playwright.config.ts. I'm using TypeScript. If you're using JS, you will see .js. So if we go there, we have to go inside the default define config. So here I'm going to define the timeout. So I'm going to say timeout colon 60,000. If you add this, that means now instead of having the default timeout, which is 30 seconds, you have now 60 seconds for each of the tests. So be careful, this is not for the entire test suite, only for each of the tests. You have 60-second max. Within 60 seconds, if your test cannot find a button or cannot click something, it will wait 60 seconds and then it will give you the status that something is wrong. So that is the idea of timeout. So again, this is for part test and not for the entire test suite. So the default is 30 seconds if you don't specify, but if you want, you can specify 60 seconds or less or more. Okay, so now the next topic is action timeout. What is this? So sets the maximum time for individual actions. So instead of the whole test, which is going to wait for 60 seconds, I can add a time for each of the actions like page.click, page.type. So I can have a fixed amount of time to click something. Okay. The default value is no specific limit unless set. That means it's gonna wait for the entire 60 seconds for something to be clicked. If it cannot find within 60 seconds, it will fail. But if you set action timeout, that means if you can't find something within, let's say, 5 seconds, then it will fail. So you don't have to wait for the total 60 seconds. You can wait for only 5 seconds. Okay. Now we can set this in the config file to have a global action timer. That means if you set this, so if I say use action timeout 5,000, that means per action, the page.click or page.type, it will take a max of 5 seconds. And if an action takes longer than this, Playwright throws an error. Now, I do not recommend using this because if you use this 5,000, this may not always work. Sometimes this is not very accurate. Instead of using a global one, what I suggest to use a timeout for each of the actions itself. So if you want, you can obviously use it, but I have noticed I have used it in my code and I noticed that if I set the timeout 5,000, some buttons may take more than 5,000 and it will not fail and the test will still pass. So you may see some unusual behavior even if you use a fixed 5,000, but if you want, you can definitely use it, which is good if your page is loading faster and everything goes very smoothly, but this is not often the case. There will be issues. Um, so if you want, as I said, first let's use this. I'm going to copy this and put it in my config file. So right after the timeout, I'm going to use this. So action timeout 5,000, that means it will take 5 seconds max per action. So if any action takes more than 5 seconds, it will fail. So it's not going to wait for the 60 seconds. Within 5 seconds, if you can't click on something, it will give you the status fail. So to test this, I'm going to use another scenario. I'm going to first show you the page. So this is a page where you can see it says Playwright Timeout Test. It should have a button, but the button will show up after 7 seconds. As you can see here, it says click me. So this button shows up after 7 seconds. So that means if you run this, it will fail because my global has a timeout of 5 seconds. That means if you're trying to click on the button, since the global timeout, action timeout is 5 seconds, this should fail because this takes 7 seconds to load. So you're not going to click within 5 seconds. It will take 7 seconds. But what I noticed is that even it takes 7 seconds, this test doesn't fail. It'll still works and actually wait 7 seconds, even though my timeout, the global action timeout is 5 seconds. Okay, so let's run this. So this should fail because the action timeout is 5 seconds. So each action should take no more than 5 seconds. But as I showed you on that web page, this button shows up after 7 seconds. So let's run this. So I'm running this test and it's running. It goes to that page. You can see the button is not there. Let's wait and it button shows up. So now if I go back, you can see that test passed. And if you notice here, it did wait for the button for almost 7 seconds to click, to find it, and then to click on it. So it did work, even though I said that shouldn't take more than 5 seconds, it did pass. So that's why I said that I don't use the global action timeout. Instead, what I use is a timeout for each of the actions. So I know that this button will show up after 7 seconds. So what I can do is I can use a timeout right in this action. So when I said wait for selector delayed button, I can put a comma and then use a timeout. And the timer I'm going to use is, let's say, 8 seconds. Okay, I think, let me check the syntax. Oh, this should be in parentheses. Oh, let's fix the syntax. So the syntax, if you would like to write the timeout, should be in a curly brace. Okay, so now I am saying that, okay, hey, wait 8 seconds. Actually, let's try first 5 seconds. I'm forcing the timeout to be 5 seconds. So now this should fail because now you're forcing it to wait exactly 5 seconds. It's not going to use the global because you are overriding the action timeout with this timeout. So this 5 second will not be applicable for this particular action. For this particular action, it will be 5 seconds. But for the next action, it will be still, oh, sorry, yeah, this is 5 seconds. Let's actually use 4 seconds. Okay, so this will take 4 seconds, but the next one, the click, will have a max duration of 5 seconds because that's what you set in the action timeout. So now let's run this and see what happens. So I'm running this and you can see that it failed. Okay, you can see that it says timeout 4000 millisecond exceeded. So this works better instead of using the action timeout in the config file. So here, if I use 4 seconds, it will fail because now it is exactly waiting 4 seconds, not waiting more than 5 seconds. In order for the test to pass, I'm going to use 8 seconds. So it takes 7 seconds for that button to show up, but I'm waiting an extra second just to make sure that it works. So now if I run it, this should pass. So now it's going to wait 8 seconds max, but it takes 7 seconds for that button to show up, so it will pass. So you can see here, it took 7,376 milliseconds for this to show up, and then it did click. And the click even took 23 milliseconds. So it worked. So that's why I said I usually prefer to use a timeout right here for each action. If I know that, okay, this item is going to take longer to load. So in that case, I can use a timeout of my choice. So that is about action timeout concept. One more thing that we can also use is also don't use this, but if we want, we can also use this, which will be applicable for the tests that you have in this particular file. So for all these tests that you have inside this file, the example.spec.ts, if you want to use a fixed time for each of the actions, you can also use this. So copy and paste this. So this is called test.use. And I'm going to use, for example, 8 seconds. Let's see if this works. So this basically means for the test cases that you have in this file, for each of the actions under each of the tests, the maximum timeout is 8,000 milliseconds. Okay, so instead of using this timeout, I'm going to now use test.use. Let's see if this works correctly. As I said, I prefer using the timeout for each of the individual actions, but you have two other options. So again, one option is using the action timeout globally. Another is using the action timeout for each of the test file, because you may have other test files too, but for this test file, each of the actions should have a max 8 seconds. So this action timeout will also overwrite the global timeout, which is 5 seconds. So now let's see if my action timeout works. I'm going to set it to first 4,000. Let's see what happens. I'm going to run this. So action timeout is 4,000 and it failed. So it did work. Okay. So the test.use timeout did work, and you can see that it took 4,010 milliseconds, which is correct because my max is 4,000. So it did work. So you can use test.use, or you can use the timeout for each of the individual actions. Now, if I change it to 8,000, so now each of the actions should take a max of 8 seconds, and this should pass my test case because my button shows up after 7 seconds. So now it's running, and you can see that it took 7,396 milliseconds, and my test passed because my action timeout is 8,000 milliseconds. So that's all about these three time features in Playwright. So we have await, we have timeout, and then we have action timeout, which can be used in three different ways. We can use it globally, we can use it in a test file, test.use, or to have more granular approach, you can also add the timeout directly for each of the actions. Okay. So that's all about it, guys. Hopefully this makes sense. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.